Good morning. Today we have read Revelation chapter 8, and at this point in the book we have seen 6 of the 7 seals on the scroll in heaven opened by Jesus, and we have read in chapter 7 the sealing and safety of God's people made known. However, the continual praises of the church, of the angels, and of more are interrupted by a half hour of silence. Now, this might point to the magnitude and the weight of God's coming judgment on the earth. And as we live even now and we serve our Lord in expectation of our ultimate salvation on the last day, we should live in a kind of solemn acknowledgement that a final judgment is still ahead. And those who don't know Christ will be lost forever. And they will experience a calamity that the earth has never known. And in that solemn acknowledgement, we should be living faithfully right now, serving others and seeking to bring the lost into God's kingdom. And there will be a day when it will all end. We have to remember that. John then sees 7 trumpets that are given to 7 angels who stood before God. The blowing of these 7 trumpets are part of the opening of the 7th and final seal on the scroll. And the judgments described at each trumpet blast to bring great distress and destruction on the earth. Now, these judgments echo some of the plagues of Egypt that we read about in the Old Testament. But we also see another angel who stood at the altar with a golden censer and was given incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne of God. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. And then the angel took it and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it down to the earth with thunder and lightning and a great earthquake. And what an incredible picture and realization that the prayers of the saints, of believers, have been stored up in heaven. In essence, we see that God has always heard all of our prayers of all believers of all time. None have been lost or fallen on deaf ears. And we see them in their full effectiveness here as God initiates final judgment upon the earth. And it's a disastrous scenario. And at the first trumpet, hail and fire mixed with blood is cast down on the earth. This causes 1/3 of the earth to be set on fire, including 1/3 of all the trees and all green grass. The second trumpet is blown and a great mountain of fire is thrown into the sea. Now this destroys 1/3 of sea creatures. Ships are destroyed and the water itself becomes blood. And when the third trumpet sounds, a great star named wormwood that falls from the sky and pollutes 1/3 of all the fresh water on the earth. And I've read that wormwood is this non-poisonous bitter plant that is common in the Middle East, and biblical authors use it as an analogy for bitterness, sorrow, and injustice. And then finally, this fourth trumpet that's mentioned in chapter 8 darkens 1/3 of the sun, moon, and stars themselves. There's many ideas about what all of these calamities might be. But what we read here is enough to know that God is getting ready for the very end. If all of that isn't enough, in verse 13, as we conclude the chapter, we read that John sees an eagle flying overhead and announcing, "Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth at the blast of the next 3 trumpets that are about to blow." So as we read these verses in chapter 8, it's a sobering reminder of God's judgment on the earth and the seriousness of sin. It's also a reminder of the necessity of godly living, confession of sin in our lives, and the proclamation of the gospel message to everyone, and that this world is not our home. It will end one day. And until that day comes, the calling of all believers is to wait with purpose, but serve God with urgency, knowing what's ahead. Let's remember that today as we go out here, even at Christmas time, and as we interact with family and friends and coworkers, we remember the urgency of living for God and proclaiming His word. Have a great weekend.